Good afternoon, everybody. We'll just wait literally 1 minute and then we'll make a start. Okay, I'm starting. It's 3 o'clock. So welcome everybody who's attending the webinar today, live, or if you're listening again on the recording. The webinar today, I'm going to talk about HACCP and GMP for transport and storage of food and feed. I'm hoping that it will be quite a short webinar, to snippets of information for you to take away. So a little bit about NQA. So who are NQA? We are a certification body. We have main offices in the States, the UK, India, and in China. We are one of the top 3 certification bodies in the UK for management system standards. We are China's #1 certification body for automotive, and globally we're America's #1 for aerospace. Globally, we are #3 for aerospace. And we do food as well. So in various countries around the world, we do food safety management system certification, and a little bit more about that as we move on. So again, about NQA in the UK, if you're joining us from the UK, we have inclusive fees, so we don't charge auditors' expenses, which is a big selling point for us, and we've tried to maintain that in the last 30 years. And these are some of the management systems we specialise in. We also offer training. Head to our website to have a look at that. Okay, so this is me. That's an awful picture. So just some information about this webinar. It's going to be sort of 30 to 45 minutes, if that. If you've got any questions, please send them to me in the chat box. I love some questions. We'll go through the questions at the end, and we will be recording this webinar and we will circulate that after the event. So this is me. I'm Maria. I have been with NQA now for 2 years. I look after our food certification program globally for NQA, but I've worked within the food certification sector for over 15 years, so lots of experience in food safety certification, whether it be HACCP, ISO 22000, BRC, FSSC, Red Tractor. The list is endless. So on this webinar, I'm hoping to give you an overview of the general principles of food hygiene code of practice, which incorporates HACCP. I hope to give you some tips and techniques for interpreting the requirements for the transport and storage industry. And the code of practice has been updated very recently, so I'm going to go through some of the changes as well with you. So first of all, what is HACCP? So this is from the World Health Organization. HACCP is science-based and systematic. It identifies specific hazards and measures for their control to ensure the safety of food. HACCP is a tool to assess hazards and establish control systems that focus on prevention rather than relying mainly on end product testing. And this is the HACCP principles, as I mentioned before, are incorporated into the Codex Alimentarius Code of Practice General Principles of Food Hygiene. And it's changed over the years because the industry's changed, but the general principles of food hygiene is applicable to all organisations within the food chain, from growing or producing to processing, transport and storage, as we've mentioned, as far as catering and retail, so the end product selling. So the scope for HACCP, what we're going to be looking at today, is transport and storage. It's not always transport and storage. It can be transport or storage. It can be food or feed for animals, or for domestic or agricultural animals. It's underestimated how important the transport and storage industry is. It's a massive part of the food chain. Things can go horribly wrong, either in storage or whilst moving product. So I've just included some words there. So it might be the logistics of how product's going to be moved. Companies might do just one of these things. Rail, road, distribution. They might just be a warehouse that store products on behalf of somebody else. But transport and storage, usually the companies do not take ownership of the products. They're usually contracted by the owners of the products to transport or store the products. So as I mentioned, the Code of Practice was updated in 2020. Previous version was from 2003. There were some slight updates in 2011, but the requirements remained the same. So we're in the process of digesting the updates, but just up front, what are the changes? So some of the changes are definitions. So instead of using the terminology of loss of control, it's been replaced with deviation. So it doesn't sound as nasty as you've lost control. It's that maybe a critical limit was not met. So there's been a deviation from what the intended critical limit is. There's been some updates to the wording of the 7 principles of HACCP. So principle 1, conduct a hazard analysis, has added and identify control measures. Principle 3, rather than establish critical limits, it's establish your validated critical limits, etc. So food safety culture, we hear it being thrown around, but has never really made it into HACCP because it's seen as it's not a limit. You can't put a measurement on it. But this has been incorporated under the management commitment to food safety within the Code of Practice. It's very important. It's been proven many times over that incidents could be avoided if the food safety culture and leadership commitment is good. And this includes things like including your employees in the food safety, basically, and the decisions and the monitoring, and giving them the responsibility, and making it open and approachable for them to voice if there has been an issue or a near miss, so that the business can deal with those things rather than keeping it quiet or actually creating creating the incidents themselves. One of the other changes that we increasingly are seeing is that GMP is being replaced by GHP. Rather than good manufacturer practice, it's becoming referred to as good hygiene practice. And I like that because, for example, with transport and storage, you're not actually manufacturing anything. So I've seen lots of times people would say that the GMP section it's not applicable to them because they're not manufacturing anything. But by renaming it to good hygiene practice, it becomes applicable to everybody. So the section of definitions at the beginning of the Code of Practice have been updated. And I always like to point this out to people because people skip past it to the requirements and never actually read it. It's quite, well, I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to things like this, but it's quite a good read, and it's good to, you know, check, is your understanding of a terminology actually what the terminology that's intended by the Code of Practice? So yeah, don't forget about the definition section. So the layout of the Code of Practice, you've got chapter 1, which is your old GMP, which is now good hygiene practices, and then chapter 2, which is your HACCP analysis, and then there's an annex 1 with some tools for like a HACCP worksheet and your hazard analysis, decision tree, etc. Some companies may decide to only incorporate chapter 2, and then they may use something else to control their GHP, for example 2002 standards or technical guidelines they are. That's entirely up to you, but it's globally a requirement that HACCP is understood in your business. I mentioned this before, the transition from GMP to GHP just makes it more relatable for people that are not manufacturing. So your 7 principles of HACCP, they've not changed massively, some changes of wording there. So the first thing you're going to do is conduct a hazard analysis and identify your control measures, determine what your critical control points are, establish and your validated critical limits, establish a system to monitor your CCPs, establish the corrective actions to be taken when monitoring indicates a deviation from a critical limit at a HACCP, at a CCP, that a CCP has occurred. So that's if the critical limit's not been met, it's been under or over, what are you going to do about it? And then validate your HACCP plan and establish procedures to verify it. And then establish documentation concerning all procedures and records appropriate to these principles and their application. So that's putting it all into documentation. So we are often asked how transport and storage organisations can implement HACCP or the Code of Hygiene into their business. This is my recommendation, is that I would create a flow diagram of all of the activities carried out by the organisation, and I would include as many people within the organisation as possible, because your warehouse manager might not necessarily warehouse manager, that's a bad example, Your operations manager, for example, might not understand all of the processes that the warehouse do. So include as many people as possible from all levels of the organisation to make sure that we capture all of the steps that are carried out. And then then identify all possible hazards at every step. Your flow diagram is probably going to be huge at this point, but that's okay. It's important that we identify every step and every hazard that needs to be controlled. Going forward, when you get right to the end, you could go into that flow diagram and you could consolidate it, making it more streamlined. But at this point, the bigger the better. Once you've got your flow diagram and all of your hazards identified, then start working through the HACCP principles. Once you've worked through your HACCP principles, go back and work through chapter 1, your GHP requirements. It's back to front, but it's what I recommend that you would do to try and capture everything. I think it's important if you do your HACCP first, you might then realize when you go back that some of the hazards are actually controlled in your GHP or your GMP, whichever you would like to refer to it to. So in preparation for an audit, conduct internal audit, someone independent of the process. So it's probably a good idea to do multiple internal audits so that you can have people across your organisation internally auditing another department or process. Have HACCP team meetings. It's important to review your procedures and verify your controls of hazards frequently, as well as after every change, no matter what that change may be. It may have an effect on your flow diagram or your hazards. And then once your system is established, think about getting it certified. That could be a number of different routes that you go down. You might already have 9001. You could incorporate it into your 9001. You could go for a food safety management system certification like ISO 22000, FSSC, or you could just have your HACCP studies certified. Also within the code of practice, we talk about continual improvement. It's important, as we just said about your HACCP team meetings, to, it's important to continually review things. Hazards are changing all the time, no matter what it is you're handling, what you're storing, the hazards change all the time. So it's really important to go back through your flow diagrams and your hazards to see if they're still the same and that everything you have in place is still valid. Just constantly strive to improve your system. It's something might be perfect, really, really good, but I think you can always find some way of improving it. That improvement might be very, very small, but might make a massive impact. It might make a small impact, but it's still an improvement. And when we are reviewing things, not all hazards are eliminated. Therefore, can the way we control those hazards be improved? Things might change all the time. Different machinery, different testing methods are being brought out. So can we improve on the way that we control that hazard? And then just the last consideration, sorry, I've got a fly. We never saw a global pandemic happening, and as much as the production of food, etc., still continued, we never anticipated how COVID would affect the things that we do. It might be very small, hardly any effect at all, but even if you say to me, we're socially distancing, that's changing your process slightly. It might mean that you have less people on doing a job, or it's going to have affected things in some ways, and we need to be seen to have understood the effects of what the pandemic will have on the activities that we're doing. I said it would be short and sweet, so that's it from my side of things. I just wanted to give you an overview on how HACCP can be incorporated into transport and storage companies. I just want to thank you all for giving me your time. And if anyone has any questions, you can type them in the chat box and I will do my very best to answer them. Okay, I've got 3 questions. We'll get through them because I've finished nice and early. The first one about planned maintenance. So in GHP it says about planned maintenance, preventative maintenance. If the building is let by somebody else, so who is responsible? If your activities are storing, transporting food or feed, and you are responsible for that product, you are responsible to ensure that a planned maintenance plan is in place and is implemented. So the person that you're renting or letting your premises from, they might ultimately be responsible for it, but you're responsible to ensure that it's carried out. I hope that answers that question. Do pest control companies have to be BPCA registered? So BPCA is the British Pest Control Association. So in the UK, it's not a requirement in HACCP that your pest control provider is a member. It's an association. I think they have to pay a membership to be a part of the association. The requirement that your pest control provider is competent, and it's up to you to ensure that they understand what activities or what products you are storing, moving, to determine what baits, etc., can be used. So the answer to that, no, they don't have to be BPCA approved, but they need to be competent. So if them being a member of BPCA tells you that they're competent, that's fine, but they don't have to be. And so the last question, let me put this in the correct context. What level of HACCP training is required for HACCP team members? Again, it's not a requirement that they have to have received formal training. The requirement is that they're competent and that they have had some kind of training, or that that they understand HACCP. So that's determined by you, really. Ideally, it would be great to have your HACCP team leader or a couple of people to have sort of HACCP level 3 and above. But again, people that have many years experience dealing with HACCP are probably more competent than people that have had no experience but have done a training course. So I would put the question back to you and say, what makes your HACCP team competent to be a member of the HACCP team? Whether that be that they've had some training, or that you've done an in-house training course yourself, that your HACCP team leader is a level 3 or level 4 trained HACCP person, and that they put together an in-house training course themselves. It's equally acceptable. Are there any more questions? No? All good. So thank you, everybody. I've only taken up 25 minutes of your time instead of the anticipated 45 minutes. But if you have any other questions, feel free to drop me an email. Happy to jump on a call, chat about food safety. And thank you for the opportunity to share my knowledge with you. Thank you.